Pedro from A&P-REACTS. I'm here today with Nige Rockett from Onslaught. How are things going?
I'm good, Pedro. Thanks. And yourself?
I'm good. I'm good. And I'm really glad that you were able to take some time to chat with me about the upcoming record, Generation Antichrist, out August 7th on AFM Records. How excited are you about the prospects of having this album finally come out for the fans to be able to listen to?
Really excited, man. Bit nervous as well. It's been 7 years since the sixth album came out, so we've been busy in all that time, don't get me wrong, but 7 years is a long time to be away, and yeah, very excited. The response to the singles that have preceded the record have been amazing, and I'm obviously nervous to see what happens on the week of release, because you never know what's going to happen. So it's 2 weeks of stress coming up, I think.
How much, obviously things have changed in these 7 years between these two records, but how much of that change impacted the band in the creation of this record?
Well, obviously since six, Andy Davis is not in the band any longer. He was my main writing partner for the last two albums before this one. So that's obviously had an impact on the way things have gone. And I basically wrote most of this album myself. Wayne, our new guitarist, has made some big contributions, which is cool. But the process changed completely. Whereas it used to be me and Andy sat in the room, sat in the studio, just bouncing ideas and recording stuff as it went. I didn't have that kind of foil this time, as it was just me alone. So that was added pressure. Because there's nobody to tell you at that moment whether something's cool or whether it's not so cool, So that maybe made things a little more difficult for me initially, because what I do, I'd record stuff, some ideas, and then send it out to the rest of the guys to get their feedback and whether they wanted any changes or they wanted input on stuff. So it was a very different process to what we've done on the last two albums, but I got my head around it in the end and kind of enjoyed it.
It's difficult, perhaps, not having, specifically if you're used to having somebody as your sounding board, going into a record where you're all by yourself, creating everything, extra pressure on you, obviously. Is there something that you're going to take from this as an experience now going into the future records, considering how different it was from the previous albums?
Well, I've written obviously the four albums that preceded that. Three I wrote mainly on my own, so I was kind of used to it, but that was a long time ago, So I think Killing Peace was the last one that I did kind of this way. But I would like next album. I think I'd like somebody else in on it again, I don't think I'd like to put myself through that. I mean, I don't want to get into the realms of kind of repeating what you've done before. Especially as we're going to start writing the next album very quickly, because we've got a lot of downtime for the next how many months until the show starts. So we may as well be productive and start work, which we have. So I'm going to be seeking the guys to put a lot more input into this one. Because I think personally, I like distance between albums, not 7 years, mind you, but distance is good between albums just so that the ideas are fresh. And I'm slightly concerned if we start writing now, it's going to be too close to Generation Antichrist to start taking some of the feelings of that, So if we get Dave and Wayne in on the writing sessions, I think it's going to help take it away from Generation Antichrist a little bit more. So, yeah.
Having the time difference between them helps you create some perspective. I'm assuming that's where you're coming from, so that the albums don't feel like they're just a continuation, or extra songs that didn't fit on one record becomes part of the next record. The gap in between allows things to become like almost a reset button. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, I mean, if you listen to every Onslaught record, they're radically different from the previous, and that's something I like. I don't like it. I don't want to cheat the fans by giving them two versions of the same album, and it's so yeah. I mean, generally, we've always been. I think the first two albums were quite close, but then you had 4 years between Killing Peace and Sounds of Violence, 2 years between Sounds of Violence and 6 out of the 7 on this one. So yeah, I think 2 years is a cool kind of gap. Like you said, it lets it reset, and then you get a fresh bunch of ideas rather than drawing from the pool that was Generation Antichrist, which is something I really don't want to do.
One of the main things I took from this album, at least the first thing that I took away from this album when I listened to it, was how cohesive the album was across all 9 tracks. But what I mean by cohesive, I don't mean the album is repetitive. I meant the album feels like one unit, just divided into 9 songs, but it's not repetitive at all. The album is very well balanced. It has a very defined soundscape across all songs, which makes it all together, but still every single song has a different fingerprint on its own. So it's an album that has a nice fluidity to it. But was that something that you had in mind going in? You wanted to create an album that felt like one album, not just a collection of songs, but at the same time where every song had its own unique identity.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, that's always the case when I would look at a record. But the one thing we did do is spend a lot of time working on the running order of the tracks. There's a lot of juggling going on, especially in the middle section of the album, where I think you need to keep the listener interested. Yeah. So there was a lot of planning around the middle. Obviously, we kind of knew where we wanted to start with the record, maybe the first 3 tracks, and that's where it gets a little bit awkward to decide in the middle where you go. But it kind of flowed really nicely, as you said. We kind of dotted the track so that you've got a fast track every other one, and it kind of worked because there's no real slow tracks on the album. They were all kind of fairly mid to up tempo. So it kind of worked really nicely when we joined them all together, when we got the final running order, because you've got Strike Fast, Strike Hard 1, and then Generation Antichrist 3, I think Addicted to the Smell of Death 5, and Religious Suicide 7. So they were spacing out, so it gave it a nice feel of variation on the overall record.
Yeah, that was definitely one of the highlights of the album to me, because normally when you're looking at a record like this that has this sort of sound to it, it's very easy to fall into a rut where there's 2 or 3 songs that sound almost alike. And I didn't feel like you guys did that at all throughout the record. I really felt that the record was really well spaced out. I wouldn't call it a roller coaster ride of an album, but it's definitely a bumpy ride across all the tracks.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, we thought about it carefully. And I think because there is no real slow track, we didn't need the feel to bunch the fast tracks together, which you find a lot of bands do. They maybe load the front end up with the fast tracks to try and maybe lull the listener into a false sense of security. We didn't feel we needed to do that, because even tracks like Bow Down to the Clowns and Empire's Fall are still kind of up with the energy. They're not the slower tracks like we've done before, like Children of the Sand or Code Black or something like that. They're all right up there in the tempo scale. So.
The album overall has obviously a very defined thrash metal sound, but to me, it felt to me that you guys merged these 2 worlds together. A little bit of an old school thrash approach, but still very modern sounding thrash at the same time. So it's almost like within the songs, not only within the songs themselves, but within the whole mix of the record, that balance was always very important and very key, at least to me as the listener, in order to get this nice fluidity through the record. Is that a perfect way to define the overall sound on this record? Old school thrash with a new school spin?
Yeah, I'm really happy that you picked up on that. I mean, this is the discussion we had before we started writing. Sat down and discussed the direction of where we want to go, because we looked at Sounds of Violence and Six, which albums we all love, but they were kind of more technical in terms of Onslaught records, busier riffs, lots of changes, lots of layers within the music. So we decided to go back to the roots a little bit more, go back to the early influences, Discharge, Motorhead, and looked at what we did on the Force album, how we approached writing and recording that. And we came up with the conclusion, let's strip the songs back, strip the layers back, strip the length of the songs back. More open riffs. I mean, I've actually used 2 or 3 riffs that I had from 1983, just lying around. It never got recorded in songs. So it kind of shows you where we took it back to. For example, the chorus riff in Strike Fast, Strike Hard is one of the riffs in I mentioned there. I've had that since 1983, and it fits perfectly within the song.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah, and obviously the production is very aggressive and very up to date. But that kind of counters with the old school vibe of the songs. You know, so, and I think it works perfectly. And I have to be honest that the old school fans have been very happy so far, because they're a tough bunch to please sometimes. You know, they keep wanting Power from Hell again or The Force, which you can't do. You have to allow a band to nurture itself and go forward. But the response has been fantastic so far. So yeah, people are really seeing what we're doing, and that's fantastic. So
I'm one of those fans. I mean, I like the old school stuff, but I really like what you guys did with this album, because I didn't feel like I was listening to an album that was recorded in the late 80s, early 90s. I felt like I was listening to an album that was recorded now. Having said that, certain riffs, certain melodies took me back to that time. So I think that's what me personally, that's what I want in a record like this. I want that feeling of taking me back, but at the same time, not a feeling like I'm listening to something that was created like 30 years ago.
Yeah, I mean,
it's a difficult balance.
Yeah, it is. But as I said, we looked at The Force, and the kind of odd thing was that we were touring the Force album for 2 years before we started writing this one. So on the 30th anniversary tour, so it kind of obviously rubbed off subliminally, and that helped the writing, I guess, of this one. But there's loads of things that we actually took from the Force album without obviously copying it. But I mean, the listener wouldn't know, but loads of ideas and things, just things like down to the short intro at the beginning. I mean, we had the intro before Let There Be Death on the Force, and we've kind of revisited that thing with a kind of different vibe, but it's the same, gives it the same overall feel, you know.
One thing I have to ask you about is the guitars on this album. I felt the guitars had so much volume. They were like a big, thick, juicy steak. Like they just felt to me like they had so much power, so much strength, so much thickness to the sound. Did you guys approach the guitars differently on this record?
No, exactly the same. The only thing, obviously, they were recorded exactly the same. The only difference was obviously the amplifiers that were used in the studio, and the mixing skills of Daniel Bergstrand. That's the only thing. I mean, we actually used a Marshall JCM 900, 2 Marshall cabs, and a PV 5150 on the album. So I mean, it's all pretty old school stuff. So no, we didn't use any of the modern kind of amps or nothing on this record. I think you can hear that clearly. The kind of mid-range crunch in there is perfect for thrash metal, you know. But yeah, it was incredible. I don't know what secrets Daniel did when he mixed the album, but it certainly sounded amazing to me.
Yeah, it definitely sounds incredible. And this is the first album for Dave Garnett. What made him the perfect fit in your mind?
We've known Dave for many years, and his previous band, Boulder Stampede, played with us several times, you know, and James is his best buddy, our drummer. So there was the personal thing was always there. When the situation with Psych kind of came a little more apparent, we were obviously getting a little concerned with what was going on, and we kind of had to sort of think about things, and should things not go how we wanted, which it didn't in the end, and we ended up splitting from Psy, obviously. So we had to be very careful, you know, especially with the back catalogue stuff, because if that didn't sound right, like, the fans would just not be happy with one little bit, especially when you go to South America, they really let you know. So we were very mindful about that, and Dave was a massive Onslaught fan anyway. So a situation arose at the end of January where we were playing a festival in Sweden that Psy was unavailable for. So we asked Dave to come and do rehearsal with us. Would he be interested in stepping into the show? Which he said, yeah. Rehearsal was great. We did the show. Amazing. Great response from the fans there. There's a lot of old school Onslaught thrash fans there, and they were blown away with Dave. So the next thing was then to approach the album. As we knew in the back of our minds what was going on with Psy, we were pretty convinced that he wasn't going to make the album, you know. So we spoke to Dave, asked him to record a couple of demo tracks, which he did, and it sounded really good. So we've seen the potential there. So we discussed it. We'd obviously spoken with Cy, and we'd arranged that we were going our separate ways, all very amicably. But we needed somebody who was going to keep the band together, basically, because I think it could have been do or die. If we couldn't find the right guy, it wasn't going to work. So the fact that he happened to be on our doorstep was just an amazing stroke of luck. So just to be sure, we got an old friend of mine, producer, a guy called Pete Hinton, in to produce the vocals with Dave. Pete produced the first 2 Saxon albums, and he was just incredible, because Dave was kind of nervous when he done this, as you can imagine. He'd never been produced properly before. He was stepping into some very big shoes, and his reputation was on the line also. I mean, as well as the band, you know. So we had to get it right. But Pete, as soon as they walked in the studio, Pete's such a calm and influence, and with such a vast knowledge of music, you know. And he got Dave relaxed, and just got some amazing performances out of him in the studio. And he nailed it all in 4 days. It was absolutely incredible. So I think Dave kind of surprised himself as well as Pete. But man, what a result we got.
Yeah, it perhaps added a little bit of extra stress. Do you feel like with everything that was happening, 7-year break between albums, change in the lineup, all of this stuff, you want the album to be the best it can be? Did that add a little bit extra stress, or the fact that you guys already knew each other and had that friendship there, did that kind of make things slightly easier for you?
Yeah, obviously the stress with Cy was really off the scale, because the album was written basically, and everything was planned for Cy, and then it kind of all became apparent what was going to happen, and then that was like, wow, we were like 6 weeks away from recording vocals. What are we going to do? And up popped Dave. James said, look, let's speak to Dave and see what he thinks. Of course, until we got him in the studio for real, with a producer, we never knew what was going to come out of his mouth, basically. you knew it was good, but you never knew if it was going to be good enough, you know. And fair play to him. He just off the scale. I think he took the aggression to another level. They're very similar in some ways. Cy's got quite a thick, deep voice, whereas Dave's a little bit more got a little bit more mid-range aggression in his voice, which I think adds to it a lot. So yeah, I mean, he sounds great doing the old material, or the 4 stuff, and Killing Peace stuff. It's absolutely perfect. So we're more than happy with it.
I'm personally happy with the results. I felt like his vocals fit the sound on this record perfectly. Like, yeah, cool. I felt like it was the perfect outlet for the sound that you guys created for the album.
Yeah, thanks, man. Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was. And as I said, I think I don't recall any bad comments, to be honest. We've had lots and lots and lots of comments coming in, obviously, and you're reading stuff online, and the reviews have been coming in, and there's not been one bad word said about Dave. Obviously, people were disappointed when Cy went. They're going to miss Cy, but I think putting out the tracks that we have in advance has really sort of cushioned the blow for the fans, and they're loving the music. So it's kind of really smoothed over the change.
Yeah, I see. I can see that. And I can see from your perspective, once it gets closer to that release date and you start releasing the singles, the pressure starts to go up, or at least you start to get a little bit more nervous on how people are going to react and interact with these new songs, considering the change. It's always a difficult change. It's not like you're changing a drummer. Not saying that the drummer is not. It's not a hard thing to replace, depending on who the drummer is. But it's always different when you're replacing the frontman.
Yeah, I mean, it's the only personal instrument in the band. Everybody else, I mean, thousands of people play the same guitars to the same amps or hit the same drums, but that one voice is unique. So it was massive, or it could have been massive, and it could have been dangerous. I think we're cool. I mean, that's the reason we put out Religious Suicide as the first track. Kind of extreme, and it kind of showcased Dave at his most aggressive and top. So I think it works well for us.
I want to ask you about a specific track on the album. It's one of my favorite songs. It's really hard to pick a favorite because this album is really well balanced. But All Seeing Eye is definitely one of my top tracks. Can you give me a little bit of an insight on how that song came about?
It's for me, it's a very Discharge influenced track, and again, it's an old riff of mine that I had stored away. Similar, I've adapted it a little since 1983 because the playing's improved a little bit. That's how it was back then. So that one's been adapted a little bit, but yeah, it's got that kind of sort of latter Discharge feel. Yeah, I mean, it's just one of those downstroke chugging songs, and it's got a political edge to it, which is something that we've introduced onto this album. Something we've not done before. But there's kind of 3 tracks that are a little more politically tinged than we normally do, and the OCNI being one of those, about the how I see the governments and everything looking at us. I mean, I'm sat in this room now. I'm looking at my little Google speaker thing, you know, that constantly lights up when I'm speaking to people. How are they listening to you? And even my phone, we could be having this conversation talking about something, and I'll go to my phone in 30 minutes time, and something will come up in my advertising saying about this or that, which we've just discussed. So it's kind of really concerning, and that's what the OCNI is about, you know. But yeah, I mean, we're all not sure whether to put it out as the next single, you know. The label want to do another single after the album release, and we're toying with 2. It's that one and Strike Fast, Strike Hard.
That's a good choice as well.
Yeah, so we're not kind of sure which one. Both has their benefits. Both completely different tempo songs, completely different feel. So we're kind of leaning towards the OCNI at the moment, because I think the video, the imagery could be quite interesting, what we could use in there. So it's kind of leaning slightly to that track at the moment.
Do you have a favorite track on this album? I know it's a hard question to ask, because when you put a record like this together, all of them are your children. But is there one that stands out to you?
No, not really. It's kind of difficult, because I was speaking to somebody about this the other day, and they said, well, I've listened to your album, and like there's 8 tracks that you can play live. There's 8 tracks that you could release as a single, which was a really nice comment. And that's something we intended to do at the beginning. We didn't, in this kind of disposable society today. Not so much in metal. Metalheads are a little bit more intelligent in that, than not to pick one track and throw the rest away. You know, they will listen to a whole album, but we wanted to write an album that people were going to listen to, and they couldn't walk away from. You know, that was the intention. So that we didn't want any weak tracks. Hence making the song slightly shorter, just to keep the listener involved. So yeah, I don't know. When Religious Suicide came out, it became my favorite track. I guess it's just been drummed into me. So I guess it's that or Strike Fast probably are my 2 favorite tracks off the album.
Almost like every new single that comes out, that becomes your new favorite track.
Yeah, it's bizarre. I suppose it's just subliminal, really. It gets drummed into your head and what have you. But I like Bow Down to the Clowns as well for the lyrically, especially. And obviously, we just recorded a video for that, so that was drummed into my head yet again. You know, so
yeah, that song is also a kill. I mean, once again, we could be going from song to song. There's not a weak track on this album. And that's why I said at the beginning, I felt like the album is very cohesive across all tracks. It's just a very strong album that doesn't really have any dips. And overall, when you look at the album, where does this album rank for you when you look back at the discography of the band?
I'm sure, being a journalist, that you hear this all the time. Bands are going to say the new album's the best one.
The best.
I genuinely believe that. You know, I think we've got the best of Onslaught on this record, from the past to the present, and with our influences in there as well. You know, Motorhead, you can hear that clearly on the Perfect Day to Die track, which is a tribute to those guys. And you can hear the Discharge influences and what have you in the track. So I think we've got all bases covered on it, and with the production on it, which amazes me even now when I listen to it. For me, it's my favorite Onslaught album.
Yeah, it's the cliche answer, but sometimes it's also the right answer.
Yeah, I mean, I look at a lot of the old school thrash bands, and they're putting out some seriously good material, you know. I love the Testament are doing and what have you, and Creative put out some good stuff of late, so the bands seem to be getting better and better as they get older.
Yeah, I'm starting to think that thrash metal is one of those metal genres that ages like wine, not like milk.
Yeah, it's strange. I don't know. I get angry.
There's some genres that fluctuated through time. Like they had a strong period of time where they were really strong, and then they kind of dipped down, and there was really almost no new blood, or there was no new creativity, and then it peaks up again. But thrash metal always seemed to stay consistent across time, and I feel like now is having a huge resurgence, not only of old school bands releasing new albums, but even new style bands coming out with still playing aggressive thrash metal sound.
Yeah, I mean, long may that continue. I mean, it's great for us and all the other bands that the popularity is there again. We've seen a resurgence, I think, sort of late 2000, early 2000s, from 8 to 12 maybe. Then it's coming up again, So you look at the festivals and bands that are on the bills and the positions on the bills, and it's great. So long may that continue. But I think that's probably a lot down to the bands creating some good music,
Yeah, I think it's a mixture of both. I think it's the bands putting out quality music, but also the times that we're living in. Thrash metal is a good sound for social unrest, if you will. At least I see it that way, because there's a little bit of the finger to the system within the sound itself is very aggressive, and it really plays out well to the youth. So I think perhaps there's a mixture of the right social landscape and then bands putting out quality music at the same time.
Yeah, I mean that's like I said, we're not usually adversely political, but 3 tracks on this album is just happen naturally, and obviously the backdrop of what's going on in the world, and that's, as you say, thrash metal is always a good outlet for anger and energy, and that's what's going on with us particularly. So.
I have one more question for you, and that is, well, considering what's going on in the world today, and the lack of ability for bands like yourself to be able to go on the road and promote this new release, what are your plans? Like, you guys have like short-term plans as far as the release of this album, and what are you going to do after the release of the album? And do you have medium to long-term plans, considering on thinking about how long this might be going?
Yeah, that's the thing. We like to discuss things in the band to make sure we get things right, And one thing that we discussed in length was whether to release this album at this time, because we'd seen lots of other bands postponing records. We've seen Testament, Lamb of God put new albums out. So it was a case of, what do we do? Do we delay, or do we go ahead? Obviously, we've decided to go ahead on the strength of that. There are no festivals, there are no shows. We've had a 7-year layoff, so we don't want to be delaying things any longer. We're working on shows for 2021. We obviously lost 3 tours and numerous festivals for this year, which is a massive disappointment for promotion. But all we can do is look ahead to maybe this time next year, and hopefully everything's going to be kind of run into some kind of normality, and we'll be a step ahead of everybody. We've got the album out. When this dies down, there's going to be many bands looking at putting albums out, trying to get tours, and it's going to be a big block at the end of the tunnel. So we're hoping that by putting the album out now, it's going to be a positive, because the fans want some new music. And we're booking shows on the strength of that right now for next year. Obviously, promoters are still being a little cagey because they don't know the situation as much as we do, but we are getting shows booked now for next year, which is a good thing on the strength of this record. So fingers crossed, it'll work out and we'll be ahead of the game. In the meantime, I guess we've got 6-8 months to burn now, which is going to be weird because we haven't really played any, especially as a band, we haven't played together since February. So we're going to have to start rehearsing when the rehearsal rooms start back up here. And all we can do really is to be writing new material. There's nothing, we don't want to be wasting the time just sitting around. We want to get ahead of the game again, and take the approach to writing what we discussed earlier.
I think you're right. I think next year there's going to be a backlog of bands releasing new records. And while might sound like a great idea, I think from a fan perspective, it's going to be overload. And I think a lot of good albums are going to just get swept under the rug because there's just going to be so much out there. On the other side, you have bands like yourselves releasing an album now when people are stuck at home or not going out, and at least it gives us something to do. It gives us something to listen to, like a little bit of a glimpse of hope.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we looked at obviously there was another edge to this as well. What you have to look at is that the record labels need to stay in business. So that was another factor in the decision, because we looked at our label's release schedule, and I think there's like 5 albums from maybe June until the end of August released. For a label the size of ours, that's incredibly low level of release. Like, so you imagine you take all those out and they've got no releases for all that time. Pressure's really going to be on those guys as well. But I think the way we're doing it, hopefully, is going to work. And hopefully, we're going to get a little bit more attention from the press, from the label, and everything like that. So far, it seems to be great. So yeah, and hopefully, we'll be ahead.
Well, and you can always save some of that material that you can now work on since there's no tours, and maybe release a little bit of an EP next year before you hit the road.
Yeah, that's a very good idea, actually, just to freshen things up again.
Yeah.
We have had a few ideas that we're touting around, so yeah, that's a cool idea, because we have actually got a couple of tracks held back. A re-recording from In Search of Sanity, which we did, which is very cool. It sounds absolutely incredible. We re-recorded the actual track In Search of Sanity with Dave, and this production that we've got, so it sounds immense. And it sounds how In Search of Sanity should have sounded back in the day. And we've done a cover of a Discharge track, so there's a couple of interesting things there.
Yeah, so my idea is not that far off. So I think it's a good marketing ploy. You know what I mean? Like, it reignites the fans, and it gives you guys like almost like of a calling, an extra calling card for when you start going out touring and playing live shows again.
Yeah, that's great. Do you manage bands?
No, I don't. I'm just giving out free.
That's a good idea, man. Yeah.
From a fan's perspective, I think if you release an album now and then you're not touring or playing shows until next year, there's a huge gap. And while the album will still be fresh in a lot of people's minds, I think it's nice to have something new to offer when you're going back on the road, either be a single or 2 or 3 tracks, something along those lines. I just feel like it reignites the interest, and also will reignite the interest on the album that was released a year before. So it works as a double-edged sword, because you get people to go back and listen to the old record, and those that didn't buy the record will go back and pick up the old like 1-year-old album. Yeah. But at the same time, you have some new material, so you get to sell some new material and have some extra stuff for hitting the road. I think it's perhaps the best solution for bands that are releasing albums this year.
Yeah, definitely.
But I still think you guys are ahead of the curve, because next year is going to be an absolute disaster with 10 records being released or a day or something like that. It's going to be just insane.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's going to be mad, but what a great idea. Thank you for that.
No problem. My pleasure. Well, thank you for taking the time today to chat about the new record, Generation Antichrist. Once again, out August 7th on AFM Records. For those of you that haven't picked it up yet, I highly recommend you go pick it up. It's a great sounding record, very cohesive from beginning to end. And it will give people a chance to headbang at home by themselves, but still feel like they're going to a show at the same time.
Cool. Thanks, Brent.
Take care.
Very much appreciated.